In the chaos of modern warfare, the Red Cross is supposed to be a shield, but in the Korangal Valley, shields don't stop 7.62 rounds. Lieutenant Elena Decker wasn't just a medic. She was the only thing keeping Sergeant Tobias Miller's soul inside his body, while mortar shells turned the ground into a graveyard. You are about to hear the true-to-life account of a woman who threaded a needle with hands slick with blood, stitched a man's throat together while bullets cracked over her head, and then when the perimeter collapsed, did the unthinkable. She dropped the scalpel and picked up the rifle. This is the story of the needle and the gun. Dust didn't just sit on the skin in the Pesh River Valley, it invaded it. It worked its way into the pores, the seams of the ballistic vests, and the firing mechanisms of the M4 carbines. For Lieutenant Elena Decker, known to the platoon simply as Dutch, the dust tasted like copper and old dry bones. She sat in the back of the second Humvee, her knees knocking against a heavy medical pack. The convoy was 3 vehicles long, a small snake winding through a canyon of jagged rock that felt like the teeth of some prehistoric beast. It was 1400 hours. The sun was a white-hot hammer beating down on the armor plating. "Hey, Dutch," a voice crackled over the comms. It was Sergeant Tobias Miller, sitting in the front passenger seat of her vehicle. "You awake back there, or are you dreaming about that California surf again?" Elena keyed her mic, adjusting the sterile gaze of her eyewear. "I'm dreaming about a shower, Miller, and a steak that doesn't come out of a plastic pouch. Keep your eyes on the ridgeline." "Ridgeline is clear. Boring as hell," Miller replied. "Just rocks and goats." Miller was 40, a career soldier with salt and pepper hair, shaved close to the scalp, and a picture of his 2 daughters taped to the inside of his helmet. He had taken Eleanor under his wing when she first arrived in country 6 months ago. The infantry boys were skeptical of a female officer, specifically a nurse attached to a forward surgical team pushing this far out. But Miller had shut that down immediately. "She stitches you up when you leak," he'd told the squad. "You treat her like the saint she is, or you answer to me." Private Garris, the 19-year-old gunner in the turret above them, shifted his weight. His boots dangled near Elena's head. "I got a bad feeling." "Sergeant," Garris said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's too quiet. Usually, the kids come out to throw rocks at us by the bridge." "Stow it, Garris," Miller said, though his tone wasn't harsh. "Don't manifest problems." The convoy slowed as it approached a bottleneck, a section of the road where the cliff face pushed out, forcing the vehicles to crawl around a blind turn. This was the Grey Mile. Elena checked her kit for the 3rd time. Tourniquets staged. Morphine auto-injectors accessible. Kerlix gauze ready. She had a habit of counting her breath when the anxiety spiked. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The vehicle lurched over a pothole. Elena looked out the thick, bulletproof glass. The terrain was alien, beautiful in a desolate, terrifying way. "Lead vehicle, report!" Captain Holloway's voice came from the first Humvee. "I see fresh dirt on the roadside. Possible IED signature. Halt! I repeat, halt!" The convoy ground to a stop. The silence that followed was heavier than the engine noise. The heat shimmered off the hood. Elena felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It wasn't the heat. It was the sudden, oppressive stillness of the valley holding its breath. "Garris, scan the high ground at 3 o'clock, Miller ordered, his voice shifting from banter to steel. "Scanning. I don't see anything." "Sarge, sun glare is bad." "Dutch, stay buttoned up," Miller said over the internal loop. "If this pops off, you don't move until I say." "Copy that." Elena whispered. She gripped the handle of her medical bag so hard her knuckles turned white. Then, the world turned white. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a pressure wave that slammed into the side of the Humvee like a wrecking ball. The lead vehicle, Captain Holloway's, vanished in a geyser of black smoke and fire. The sound caught up a split second later, a thunderclap that rattled Eleanor's teeth and shattered the calm of the afternoon. IEDIED, contact front. Miller screamed. Before the dust could settle, the valley walls erupted. It wasn't just an IED, it was a complex ambush. RPK machine gun fire rained down from the cliffs in a torrent, sparking off the armor of Elena's vehicle like angry fireflies. Garris, return fire, get on the point. 5-0. Miller roared. Above them, the turret spun. Garris unleashed a burst of heavy machine gun fire, the thump, thump, thump vibrating through the chassis. But the enemy had the high ground and the element of surprise. An RPG rocket-propelled grenade streaked down from the ridgeline, leaving a trail of grey smoke. It missed the turret by inches and struck the rocky bank beside them, showering the vehicle with shrapnel. "We're in the kill zone, driver. Reverse, reverse." Miller yelled. "I can't!" The driver screamed back. "Rear vehicle is hit, we're boxed in." Elena looked back. The third Humvee was burning. They were trapped between two burning wrecks, sitting ducks in a stone shooting gallery. Bail out, get to the rocks on the right." Miller kicked his door open. Elena scrambled for the door handle. The air outside was a cacophony of snaps, cracks, and booms. She tumbled out of the heavy door, dragging her aid bag, and hit the hard dirt. The dust was blinding. "Go, go, go." Miller was providing covering fire, his rifle shouldered, spitting brass casings into the dirt. Elena sprinted 5 yards to a cluster of boulders that offered the only cover. She dove behind them, chest heaving. Private Garris slid in beside her, eyes wide, hyperventilating. "Where's Miller?" Elena yelled over the roar of gunfire. She looked back at the Humvee. Miller was still at the door, suppressing the enemy positions to buy them time. "Miller, move!" she screamed. He turned to run toward them. A single shot rang out distinct, sharper than the spray of AK-47 fire. A sniper round. It took Miller in the neck, just above the collar of his body armor. He didn't fall immediately. He spun, his hand flying to his throat. A look of profound confusion crossing his face. Then his knees buckled. He collapsed into the open ground, 3 meters from safety, 3 meters from Eleanor. Blood sprayed across the dry earth, bright arterial red against the grey dust. "No," Eleanor screamed. She didn't think. The training took over, but beneath the training was a primal refusal to let him die. She lunged forward. "Dutch, don't!" Garris grabbed her vest. She elbowed him in the face, breaking his grip. "Cover me!" Elena Decker scrambled out from behind the rocks, back into the kill zone, crawling through the dirt toward the fallen sergeant, while the bullets kicked up dust clouds around her like a storm of angry hornets. The 3 meters felt like 3 miles. Elena stayed low, her face nearly grinding into the gravel. She could hear the distinct crack-thwack of rounds passing supersonic, violently close to her head. The enemy had seen her. They knew she was a medic, or at least, they knew she was trying to save a combatant. In this valley, the Red Cross patch was just a target reference point. She reached Miller. He was on his back, eyes wide and panicked, gurgling. His hands were clawing at his neck, slick with blood that was pumping out in terrifying, rhythmic spurts. Carotid jugular subclavian. Her mind raced through the anatomy. "Toby, look at me!" she yelled, grabbing his wrists and forcing them away to see the wound. It was bad. The sniper round had entered just above the clavicle, tearing through the trapezius muscle and nicking the side of the jugular vein and the surrounding tissue. It was a jagged, ugly tear. The blood wasn't just oozing, it was pulsing. She slammed her gloved palm directly onto the wound. "I got you. I got you. Toby." Miller tried to speak, but only bloody froth bubbled at his lips. His complexion was already turning a waxy grey. He was bleeding out. "Garrus suppressive fire! Keep their heads down!" Elena screamed over her shoulder. From the rocks, Garrus and the driver were firing blindly up at the cliffs. It wasn't enough, but it was all they had. Elena dragged Miller by the drag handle on the back of his vest. She couldn't stand up, or she'd be cut in half. She had to crab walk backward, pulling 200 pounds of soldier and gear, while keeping pressure on his neck with one hand. A bullet struck the ground inches from her knee, sending rock splinters into her leg. She ignored it. 1, 2, pull. 1, 2, pull! She grunted, straining every muscle in her core. They tumbled behind the boulder, out of direct line of sight from the main ambush point, but they were still exposed to flanking fire. Elena immediately kneeled over him. She ripped open her medical kit, the zipper sounding like a chainsaw in her heightened state of hearing. "Okay. Okay," she muttered, her hands moving with a speed that defied the adrenaline shaking her body. She grabbed a package of combat gauze impregnated with a clotting agent and jammed it into the wound channel. Miller arched his back, a silent scream on his face. I know. I'm sorry," she said, pushing deeper. "I have to pack it." She held pressure. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The gunfire was intensifying. The enemy was maneuvering. They were coming down from the ridges. She lifted her hand slightly to check. The blood pushed the gauze out immediately. The vessel was torn too wide. The pressure wasn't holding. The clot wouldn't form. "Damn it!" Elena cursed. She looked at Miller. His eyes were fluttering. He was going into hypovolemic shock. If she didn't close this vessel physically, he would be dead in 3 minutes. Field dressings wouldn't work. A tourniquet couldn't go around a neck. She looked at her kit. She had a minor surgery set forceps, a needle driver, and a packet of non-absorbable suture thread. It was insane. Suturing a major vessel repair in the middle of a firefight, in the dirt, with no anesthesia and bad lighting, it was malpractice. It was impossible. It was his only chance. "Garrus, I need you here," Elena shouted. The terrified private crawled over. What? What is it?" "Put your hands here. Push down. Hard. Do not let go." Garrus pressed his trembling hands onto Miller's neck. Elena ripped open the suture packet. She clamped the curved needle into the driver. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm going to sew him up," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming eerily calm. "You're what?" Garrus stared at her, horrified. "He's leaking too fast. I have to tie off the bleeder. Dutch, they're flanking us. We have to move. We can't move him like this. He dies if I move him." A mortar round landed 50 meters away, the ground shaking so violently that Elena nearly dropped the needle. Dust rained down on them. "Hold him steady." Elena leaned in. The world narrowed down to a 2-inch square of torn flesh. She wiped the blood away with a piece of gauze. She could see the tear in the vessel wall, pulsing dark red. "Okay, Toby, stay with me." She inserted the needle. The first stitch was the hardest. Her hands, which had been trembling moments before, went still. It was a phenomenon she had experienced in the ER back in the States, but never like this. The chaos of the war, the screaming of the driver, the thud, thud, thud of enemy machine guns. The smell of burning rubber and cordite faded into a dull roar in the background. All that existed was the needle, the thread, and the tissue. Pop. The needle pierced the tough skin. Miller flinched, his eyes rolling back. "Hold him," she hissed at Garris. "I'm trying, he's slippery." She drove the needle through the subcutaneous tissue, hooking the fascia around the vein. She couldn't suture the vein itself perfectly, that was vascular surgery requiring a microscope, but she could perform a ligation, tying off the tissue around it to pinch the tear shut. It was crude, it was desperate, but it was mechanics. She looped the thread, a surgeon's knot. She pulled it tight. The blood flow slowed slightly. "One down," she whispered. A bullet ricocheted off the boulder behind her, sending a jagged piece of granite flying. It sliced across Elena's cheek, just below her eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't wipe the blood running down her own face. She reset the needle. "Incoming!" the driver screamed. Another RPG struck the destroyed Humvee 10 yards away. The heat wave washed over them. Elena shielded Miller's open wound with her body as debris rained down. She felt something heavy hit her back, a rock or a piece of metal bruising her ribs through the vest. She gritted her teeth, tasting iron. She sat back up. "Garris, are you hit?" No, just deaf. "Keep pressure." She went for the second stitch. In, twist, pull. The lighting was changing. The smoke from the burning vehicles was drifting over them, creating a thick, choking fog. It made it harder to see, but it also obscured them from the snipers on the ridge. "I can't see the bleeder," she muttered. She leaned closer, her face inches from the wound. She found the edge of the laceration. She threw a running mattress suture, a technique designed to pull deep tissues together under tension. She pulled the knot tight. The spurting stopped. It turned into a slow ooze. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." She did 3 more rapid throws, closing the skin over the internal repair. It was ugly. It would leave a scar that would look like a zipper from a horror movie. But the blood stayed inside the body. She cut the thread. Okay, let up," she told Garris. Garris lifted his hands. The bandage held. Elena slumped back against the rock, her lungs burning. She checked Miller's pulse. It was thready, weak, rapid, but it was there. "Is he?" Garris asked. "He's alive, but he's lost a lot of blood." "Lieutenant!" The driver, Corporal Banks, crawled over. His face was blackened with soot. "We have a problem." Elena looked up, snapping out of her surgical trance. "What?" "I just checked the ammo count. I've got 2 mags left." "Garris." Garris checked his vest. 1. And the one in the gun. And the radio. Elena asked. "Dead," Banks said. "Antenna got sheared off in the first blast. We have no comms, no air support." Elena looked at the cliffs. The firing had stopped for a moment. That was worse than the noise. It meant they were communicating, coordinating. "They're coming down," Banks said, his voice flat. "They know we're hurt. They're going to overrun us to take prisoners or finish the job." Elena looked at Miller, unconscious, his chest rising and falling in shallow hitches. She looked at her hands, stained red up to the elbows. She had just performed a miracle. She had pulled him back from the grave. If the enemy overran them now, that miracle meant nothing. They would slit Miller's throat right over the stitches she had just placed. The thought ignited a cold fury in her gut. "How many rifles do we have?" Elena asked. "Mine's jammed," Banks said, showing the twisted receiver where shrapnel had hit it. "I'm using my sidearm." "I got my M4, Garris said, clutching it like a teddy bear. Elena looked at Miller's weapon. It was lying in the dirt where he had fallen, 5 yards away, exposed. "We need that rifle," Elena said. "It's in the open. Dutch. You go out there. They'll cut you down," Banks said. Elena looked at the unconscious sergeant. She touched the fresh stitches on his neck gently. "I didn't fix him just to let him die." She stood up, crouching low. "Dutch, what are you doing?" Elena didn't answer. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the smoky air. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. The red cross on her patch felt like it was burning off. She sprinted. She dove into the open, sliding through the blood mud she had created earlier. She grabbed Miller's M4 by the barrel. Bullets kicked up the dirt around her immediately. Snap, snap, snap. She rolled, pulling the weapon to her chest, and scrambled back behind the rock. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She checked the optic. Cracked, but functional. She checked the selector switch. "Banks, take the left side with your pistol. Garris, watch the center," Elena ordered. Her voice sounded different. The tremor was gone. "What about you?" Garris asked. Elena shouldered the rifle, tucking the stock firmly into the pocket of her shoulder, right next to the strap of her medical bag. She looked down the sights, scanning the ridge where the muzzle flashes had come from. "I'm going to make sure they don't get closer." The rifle in Eleanor's hands felt heavier than it looked. It smelled of CLP gun oil and the sweat of the man she had just pulled back from the brink of death. She pressed her cheek against the stock, the polymer digging into her zygomatic bone, the very bone she knew could shatter with less than 4 pounds of pressure. "Dutch, look out 11 o'clock. Garris screamed, his voice cracking. Movement. A flash of tan fabric against the grey rock. Elena didn't think about the Hippocratic Oath. That oath belonged to a clean room with fluorescent lights and sterilized instruments. Here, in the dirt. The only oath was the one she had made to the men beside her. "I will not let you die alone." She saw the insurgent. He was moving fast, bounding from a scrub bush to a depression in the earth, carrying an RPK machine gun. If he set up there, he would have a clear line of fire into their small refuge behind the boulders. He could shred them. Elena took a breath. Exhale. Squeeze. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound was deafening, distinct from the crump of distant mortars. She missed. The dirt kicked up 2 feet to the left of the running man. "Just lead him!" Banks yelled, firing his pistol uselessly at the distance. Elena adjusted. She wasn't an infantryman, but she was a soldier. She remembered Miller's voice at the range, back at Fort Campbell. "Don't jerk the trigger. Dutch. Treat it like a syringe. Smooth pressure. Surprise yourself when it breaks." She tracked the target. He was setting up the bipod of his machine gun. He was 2 seconds away from unleashing hell. She fired again, and again. A double tap. The first round hit the rock in front of him, sending stone shards into his face. He flinched. The second round caught him high in the chest. The man crumpled backward, his weapon falling from his hands, sliding down the scree slope. Elena lowered the rifle, her chest heaving. A wave of nausea hit her, sharp and acidic. She had just spent 20 minutes fighting God and physics to sew a man's neck together, to keep the blood inside. Now, she had just spilled it. The dichotomy threatened to tear her mind apart. "Got him. You got him." "Dutch," Garris yelled. a mix of awe and terror in his eyes. "Check your sectors," Elena snapped, her voice harsh. She couldn't afford to feel. Not yet. She shoved the nausea down into a dark box in her mind and locked the lid. "They know we're fighting back. They're going to probe the flanks." "Ammo check," Banks rasped. He was clutching his side. A piece of shrapnel had found a gap in his armor during the initial blast. His face was pale. "I have half a mag," Garris said. Elena checked Miller's rifle. "I have 20 rounds. Maybe." They were 3 people against a valley, and the valley was waking up. The shadows were lengthening. The ambush had started in the blinding heat of the afternoon, but time in a firefight is a distorted, elastic thing. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like seconds. The sun was dipping behind the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, casting long, skeletal shadows across the kill zone. "They're waiting for dark," Banks whispered. "They'll rush us when the sun goes down. Night vision won't help if they swarm us." Elena looked at Miller. He was still unconscious, but his breathing had changed. It was raspier. The swelling in his neck was pushing against his trachea. "He needs an airway," Elena muttered. She handed the rifle to Garris. "Cover me. Don't fire unless you have a target. Conserve every round." She crawled back to Miller. She pulled a nasopharyngeal airway, a soft rubber tube, from her kit. She lubricated it with spit, lacking anything else, and gently inserted it into his nostril. Miller groaned, a low, guttural sound, but he didn't wake. "I know. Toby. I know." She checked the dressing. The stitches were holding. The bleeding had stopped, but he was entering the second phase of shock. He was cold, despite the heat of the day. She took off her outer blouse, stripping down to her brown t-shirt, and draped the uniform top over him. It was a pathetic gesture against the coming chill of the mountain night, but it was all she had. "Lieutenant," Banks said softly. "Look." Elena looked up. On the ridgeline, silhouettes were moving. Not 1 or 2. Dozens. They were silhouetted against the dying sun like vultures gathering on a wire. "They're regrouping," Garris whimpered. "There's too many." Elena grabbed the rifle back from Garris. She checked the chamber again. "We aren't dying here," she said. It wasn't a promise. It was a command. "Garris, give me your hand." The young private, shaking so hard his teeth chattered, reached out. Elena gripped his hand with a strength that surprised him. "You are going to make it home, too. Where are you from?" "Ohio," he squeaked. "You're going back to Ohio. You're going to eat chili and drive your truck. But right now, I need you to be the meanest son of a bitch in this valley. Can you do that?" Garris swallowed. He looked at the blood on her hands, the fierce determination in her eyes. He nodded. Yeah. Dutch. I can do that." "Good. Banks, can you shoot? Give me a target within 20 yards, and I'll put a hole in it." Banks grunted, raising his pistol. "All right," Elena said, settling back behind the rock, looking down the sights of Miller's rifle. "Let them come." The sun vanished, and the temperature plummeted 20 degrees in 20 minutes. The darkness wasn't total. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky, but the shadows in the valley became deep, impenetrable pools of ink. This was the glass house, a term Miller had used once. When you're pinned down, and the enemy is all around you, and you can't see them, but they can see you. You're living in a glass house. Don't throw stones unless you mean it. Elena's eyes strained against the dark. Every shifting shadow looked like a man with a knife. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a footstep. Crack! A single shot rang out from the darkness, hitting the rock inches from Eleanor's face. Rock dust sprayed into her eyes. Sniper! Banks hissed. "Don't return fire," Elena whispered. "He wants us to flash so he can see exactly where we are." They waited. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Then, a sound that chilled Elena's blood more than the gunfire. A voice. It was close, maybe 30 yards away. "American," the voice called out. It was a man's voice, accented, mocking. "You are hurt. We hear you crying. Give up. We give you water." "Don't listen," Banks growled. "American doctor." The voice continued. They knew. They had seen the cross. "We have hurt men, too. You help us. We help you." Elena tightened her grip on the rifle. It was a psychological game. They were trying to lure them out, or just wear them down before the final push. "Hey, Dutch." A weak whisper came from the ground. Elena whipped her head around. Miller's eyes were open. They were glassy and unfocused, but he was awake. "Toby." She moved to his side, keeping her head low. "Don't try to talk. I stitched your neck. You tear it. You die." Miller moved his hand, fumbling for his vest. He tapped his magazine pouch. "Empty." He wheezed. The sound was like dry leaves scraping together. "We have 1 mag left. Garris has half." Miller blinked slowly. He seemed to be processing this. He reached for his drop pouch, the bag where soldiers dump empty magazines. He fumbled with it, his fingers clumsy. "What do you need?" Elena asked. Miller pointed to his sidearm, a standard-issue Beretta M9, still holstered on his chest. He couldn't draw it. His arm was too weak. Elena unclipped it. She checked it. Full magazine. She put it in his hand. "Last. Stand," Miller whispered. A grim smile touched his lips. "No last stands," Elena said fiercely. "We're getting out." Suddenly, the darkness erupted. They didn't come with a roar. They came with grenades. 3 dark shapes sailed through the air. 1 landed short, 1 went long. The 3rd landed inside their perimeter, 5 feet from Garris. "Grenade!" Garris shrieked. Time froze. Elena saw the oval shape in the dirt. She saw Garris staring at it, paralyzed by the reptile brain freeze response. Elena dropped the rifle. She didn't dive on the grenade that would leave Miller and Banks defenseless. She lunged at Garris, shoving him violently behind the engine block of the wrecked Humvee just as the grenade detonated. Boom! The concussion wave hit Elena like a physical blow, lifting her off the ground and slamming her into the rock wall. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. Dust and dirt filled her mouth. She gasped, trying to suck in air, but her diaphragm was spasming. "Get up! Get up!" She rolled over. Garris was screaming, clutching his leg, but he was alive. The engine block had absorbed the shrapnel, but the explosion was the signal. Muzzle flashes sparked from the darkness like strobe lights. They were rushing. "Here they come!" Banks yelled, firing his pistol. Pop, pop, pop! Elena grabbed her rifle. She couldn't hear the shots anymore, only the ringing. But she could feel the recoil. She saw shapes moving in the gloom. She fired. She didn't aim for heads or chests. She aimed for movement. A figure loomed over the rock to her right. He had a knife. Elena swung the barrel, but he was too close. He grabbed the muzzle of her rifle, pushing it aside. She didn't hesitate. She let go of the rifle with her right hand, reached for the scalpel she had shoved into her vest webbing earlier, and slashed downward. The attacker screamed and fell back. Elena scrambled back, reclaiming her weapon. She fired point-blank into the darkness where he had fallen. "I'm out! I'm out!" Banks yelled. His slide was locked back. "Garris!" Elena screamed. I can't see. Garris was firing wildly. They were overrun. There were too many. Elena had 6 rounds left. She could count them in her head. She backed up until her legs hit Miller's body. She stood over him, straddling his legs. If they wanted him, they would have to go through her. She raised the rifle. 5. She dropped a man, charging the center. 4. She fired at a muzzle flash to the left. 3. 2. She squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. Elena Decker stood in the darkness, a useless rifle in her hand, a scalpel in the other. She looked down at Miller. He was looking up at her, raising the pistol she had given him. He was going to try to shoot the first man that touched her. "I'm sorry, Toby," she whispered. Then, the sky tore open. The click of the empty chamber was louder than any explosion. Elena Decker stood in the darkness, the useless M4 carbine trembling in her right hand, a scalpel gripped white-knuckled in her left. The silence of her weapon screamed of finality. She looked down at Sergeant Miller. He was barely conscious, his face a mask of grey pain. Yet he was raising the Beretta pistol she had given him. His hand wavered, tracking the shadows, preparing to spend his last breath protecting her. "I'm sorry, Toby," she whispered. The apology wasn't for failing him. As a medic, she had saved him there. It was for failing to hold the line. The shadows around them detached themselves from the rocks. The enemy was no longer firing. They were closing in for the kill. Elena could hear the crunch of boots on gravel, the heavy breathing of men who knew their prey was cornered. She tightened her grip on the scalpel. She wouldn't go quietly. She would make them pay for every inch. Then, the sky tore open. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a vibration that rattled the fillings in Eleanor's teeth and shook the dust from her uniform. The air pressure dropped, a vacuum sucking the breath from her lungs. Then came the roar, a terrifying, guttural chainsaw rip that sounded like the earth itself was splitting in half. Bro! The distinctive, bone-rattling signature of a GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. A line of explosions erupted 50 yards in front of their position, a linear wall of fire and pulverized rock that disintegrated the advancing enemy line. The tracer rounds from the aircraft looked like a laser beam of angry red light connecting the heavens to the earth. The ground shook so violently that Elena lost her footing and fell to her knees beside Miller. The concussion wave washed over them, hot and smelling of sulfur. Friendly air. Banks screamed from behind the engine block. He was laughing, a hysterical, broken sound that bordered on madness. Get some! The A-10 roared overhead, its twin engines whining in a high-pitched scream, banking hard against the moonlit peaks for a second pass. The sheer violence of the intervention froze the battlefield. The insurgents, moments ago poised for slaughter, were now scrambling for cover that no longer existed. "Comms, who has comms?" Elena yelled, looking around wildly. Their radio was dead. Banks's radio was smashed. Who had called this in? "It's not us," Garris yelled, clutching his bleeding ears. Then, a voice crackled from Miller's chest. It was faint, tinny. But in that moment, it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. It was coming from his personal intersquad radio. "Viper 2-1, this is Wraith 6. We have eyes on your IR strobe. Keep your heads down. We are clearing the yard. Danger close. IR strobe. Elena looked down, confused. She looked at Miller. His hand wasn't on the pistol anymore. It was resting on his vest, clutching a small, rectangular plastic device. The safety catch was flipped off in his semi-conscious state. While Elena was fighting off the assault and Banks was firing his last rounds, Miller hadn't been fumbling for a magazine. He hadn't been trying to reload. He had been fighting through the fog of shock to pull his MS-2000 strobe from his shoulder pocket to the naked eye. It was dark, but to the pilots looking through night vision goggles, that strobe was a blinding, pulsing beacon of infrared light screaming, "We are here." He hadn't been fighting the enemy. He had been guiding the angels. Wraith 6, this is Viper element. Elena grabbed the hand mic from Miller's chest, her fingers slipping on the blood-slicked plastic. "We are ineffective. We have urgent casualties. We need immediate extraction. Copy that. Viper, we see you. QRF is 2 minutes out. Stay down. Repeat. Stay down." The next 2 minutes were a blur of orchestrated chaos. The A-10 made a second pass, the 30mm cannon turning the ridgeline into a cloud of dust and silence. The enemy fire ceased entirely. Then came the heavy, rhythmic thwop, thwop, thwop of rotors. Searchlights cut through the darkness, blindingly bright, sweeping the canyon floor. The dust kicked up by the downdraft was a hurricane, stinging Elena's exposed skin and forcing her to shield Miller's face. "Pop smoke, mark the LZ," a voice commanded over the radio. Elena fumbled for the pouch on Banks's vest. She grabbed a smoke grenade, green smoke. She pulled the pin, the spoon pinging off into the dark, and threw it as hard as she could toward the open ground. A thick, verdant cloud billowed out, illuminated by the searchlights, swirling violently in the rotor wash. The lead Black Hawk flared, its nose pitching up, wheels touching down 20 yards away. The side doors slid open, and a stream of figures poured out. Rangers. They moved with a fluidity that was terrifying to behold. Weapons raised, sweeping the perimeter, turning the chaos of the ambush into a controlled, secure zone. They swarmed the position. "Identify, identify," the lead ranger shouted, his voice amplified by the headset. US Lieutenant Decker," Elena shouted, dropping the scalpel and raising her hands. "We have wounded." 2 PJs, pararescue men, rushed forward, bypassing her to get to the man on the ground. "Casualties," the lead medic barked, kneeling beside Miller. Elena's mind snapped. The soldier who had been shooting at shadows vanished. The nurse returned with vengeance. "Sergeant Miller, GSW to the neck, anterior triangle, vascular compromise." Elena rattled off the report with machine gun speed, her voice cutting through the rotor noise. "I performed a ligation of the external jugular and sutured the fascia. He's stable, but critical. He has lost 2 liters. Easy. He needs whole blood." "Now." The PJ froze for a split second. He looked at the bloody, improvised bandage on Miller's neck. He looked at the suture kit lying in the dirt. Then he looked up at Eleanor, at her dirt-streaked face, the blood on her uniform, and the sheer ferocity in her eyes. You did a vascular repair." "Here." The medic's voice was incredulous. He checked the pulse. "Jesus, it's holding." "Just get him on the bird," Elena screamed, shoving the medic's shoulder. "Move him. Let's go load him up." They lifted Miller onto a collapsible litter. Banks and Garris were hauled up by the Rangers, half-carried toward the waiting helicopters. Elena was the last one on the ground. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair across her face. She looked back at the pile of rocks that had been their home, their fortress, and their tomb for the last 4 hours. She saw the empty shell casings glinting in the searchlight. She saw the dark stains in the dirt where Miller had bled. She saw the rifle she had dropped, the weapon that had saved them when the medicine couldn't. "Mom, let's go. We are leaving," the crew chief yelled from the door of the Black Hawk, extending a gloved hand. Elena turned. She grabbed his hand and was hauled into the belly of the helicopter. The floor was metal and vibrating. She collapsed onto it, her legs finally giving out. The bird lifted off, banking hard to the left to avoid any lingering ground fire, climbing aggressively out of the kill zone. Elena pulled her knees to her chest. She watched the open door as the ground fell away. The grey mile was just a scratch in the earth now, disappearing into the vast, indifferent darkness of the Afghan mountains. She looked at her hands. They were shaking violently now, a tremor she couldn't control. They were stained with dirt, gun oil, and the blood of the man she had refused to let die. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the vibrating fuselage. She was a nurse. She was a soldier. She was alive. But as the adrenaline crashed, leaving her hollowed out and shivering, she realized she had left a part of herself down there in the dirt, stitched into the ground just as surely as she had stitched Miller's neck. The war was still out there. But for tonight, the needle had beaten the gun. 3 days later, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. The silence was the loudest thing Elena Decker had ever heard. After the cacophony of the Korangal Valley, the snapping of supersonic rounds, the roar of the A-10 Warthog, the screaming of men, the hushed corridors of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center felt like a pressurized tomb. The air here didn't taste like copper or pulverized limestone. It smelled of aggressive antiseptic, floor wax, and filtered, climate-controlled oxygen. It was too clean. It felt almost hostile in its sterility. Elena sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting area of the ICU, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum. She was technically off duty. She had been processed, debriefed, and ordered to sleep. She had showered, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, watching the grey-brown water swirl down the drain. But she couldn't wash the sensation off her hands, the phantom stickiness of drying blood, the vibration of the rifle's recoil against her shoulder bone. She looked down at her feet. She was wearing clean scrubs, issued by the hospital logistics team, but she had refused to give up her boots. They were still laced tight, the tan suede stained with oil and dirt from the grey mile. They were the only things anchoring her to the reality of what had happened 72 hours ago. If she took them off, she feared she might float away into the ether of shock. A heavy door swung open at the end of the hall. The hydraulic hiss made Eleanor flinch, her muscles tensing for a threat that wasn't there. A surgeon stepped out. He was a tall man with tired eyes, peeling off a surgical cap to reveal matted, sweat-dampened hair. Dr. Aris. He was the vascular specialist who had received the medevac chopper. Elena stood up. Her legs felt heavy, as if her bones had been replaced with lead pipes. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that defied her exhaustion. "Lieutenant Decker." "Doctor?" Aris asked, his voice low. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice sounding raspy to her own ears. "How is he? Is he—" "Doctor," Aris exhaled a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't speak immediately, and for a terrifying second, Elena prepared herself for the news that the extraction had been in vain. Then, a small, genuine smile broke through the surgeon's fatigue. "He's going to make it." Lieutenant. Eleanor let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the first IED blast tore the convoy apart. The tension didn't leave her body all at once. It drained out slowly, leaving her knees weak. She leaned back against the cold wall for support. We had to go back in to clean up the wound channel. Doctor, Aris continued, stepping closer, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something bordering on awe. I need to tell you something. I've been operating on trauma patients for 15 years. I've seen field dressings, tourniquets, chest seals. I've seen it all. He shook his head, looking at her hands. But I have never seen a vascular ligation like that performed in the dirt. You tied off the external jugular and sutured the fascia with a precision that would be difficult to achieve in this hospital, let alone under fire. Elena looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly now, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline dump. I did what I had to do. The pressure wasn't holding. If you hadn't done precisely that, and precisely when you did it, Sergeant Miller would have been dead before the bird even landed. Doctor, Aris said firmly, you didn't just buy him time. Decker, you rebuilt him. That wasn't first aid. That was surgery. Elena nodded, unable to find the words. The praise felt distant, like it was directed at someone else. He's waking up, Aris said softly. The anesthesia is wearing off. He's been thrashing a bit, asking for Dutch. Elena pushed herself off the wall. Can I see him? 5 minutes. Don't get him excited. Elena walked into the recovery room. It was a world of beeping machines and tangled wires. The rhythmic whoosh hiss of a ventilator provided a mechanical soundtrack to the room. In the center of it all lay Sergeant Tobias Miller. He looked smaller than he had in the valley. The imposing figure of the platoon sergeant was hidden beneath layers of blankets. A thick, white dressing was taped securely around his neck, and drain tubes ran from the site to a collection canister. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, but the grey, waxy look of death was gone. His eyes were open. They were glassy and unfocused, tracking the ceiling tiles. Hey, Sarge, Elena whispered, approaching the bedside rail. Miller's head turned slowly. It was a labored movement, stiff and painful. His eyes found hers. And for a moment, he just stared, trying to bridge the gap between the chaotic memory of the ambush and the quiet of the room. He tried to speak, but his voice was a wreck, a dry, broken rasp that barely carried over the hum of the machines. He swallowed, wincing as the muscles in his throat contracted against the sutures. He wheezed, closing his eyes for a second to summon the strength. Did we get him? Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, hot, stinging tears that finally cut through the numbness. She reached through the bedrail and took his hand. His calloused palm was warm. Yeah, Toby, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We got him. The cavalry came. Banks and Garris are okay. They're in the ward downstairs. Miller squeezed her hand. The grip was weak. Nothing like the iron handshake he usually possessed. But the intent was there. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped away rank and protocol. There was a knowledge in his eyes now, a shared burden that only the two of them would ever truly understand. Garris came to see me, Miller rasped, each word a struggle. He told me. Elena stiffened slightly. Told you what? He told me you picked up the rifle. Elena looked down at their joined hands. She traced the knuckles of his hand with her thumb. We were overrun. Banks was dry. I didn't have a choice. You... Miller took a shallow breath, his chest rising and falling beneath the hospital gown. You saved my life twice. Dutch. Once with the needle. Once with the gun. You taught me how to use the gun. Miller. I just taught myself how to use the needle. Miller closed his eyes, a look of profound peace settling over his rugged features. A faint smile touched his lips, not a soldier's grimace, but a human expression of gratitude. Best. Damn. Medic. In the army, he whispered. The effort exhausted him, and his grip on her hand loosened as sleep began to pull him back under. Elena stayed with him until his breathing evened out into a deep, restorative rhythm. She watched the heart monitor trace the steady, reliable line of his pulse, a line she had fought the entire valley to protect. Finally. She let go of his hand and walked out of the room. She needed air. Real air. She navigated the maze of corridors until she found an exit that led to a small staff courtyard. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the German night. The cold air hit her face like a slap, sharp and awakening. It was dark, but unlike the suffocating darkness of the glass house in the valley, this darkness was peaceful. Distant streetlights cast a soft orange glow on the manicured hedges. Elena reached into the pocket of her scrubs. Her fingers brushed against a small, crinkly object. She pulled it out. It was the foil packet of unused suture thread she had saved from her kit. She held it up to the moonlight, turning it over in her fingers. It was such a small thing, a curved needle and a length of nylon thread. Yet, it was the only thing that had stood between Miller and the void. War was a machine, a massive, industrial grinder designed to tear people apart. That was its nature. Bullets, shrapnel, bombs, they existed solely to separate flesh from bone, soul from body, Elena realized then. Standing in the cold, that she was the counter-machine. She was the stitch. She was the thread that pulled things back together when the world tried to rip them apart. For 30 minutes in that valley, she had been a soldier. She had picked up the rifle because the situation demanded death to preserve life. The weight of that decision would sit in her gut for a long time. But looking at the suture packet, she knew who she really was. She would put the rifle down. The war could have the gun. But the needle she would keep. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, cold air, letting it displace the dust of the Korangal. She slipped the packet back into her pocket, turned her back on the night, and walked back inside to finish her shift. Elena Decker's story is a testament to the dual nature of survival. In the most extreme circumstances, the line between healer and warrior blurs, but the objective remains the same: protect life at all costs. She walked out of the grey mile with blood on her hands, some of it saved. Some of it spilled and carried the weight of both. It serves as a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear surgical gloves and carry an M4 carbine. If this story moved you, if you felt the tension of the grey mile and the triumph of the human spirit, please hit that like button. It helps us tell more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to know what real bravery looks like. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a chaotic true story from the front lines. Until next time, stay safe.